Marcus Wellington adjusted his platinum cufflinks as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. The Seattle skyline stretched before him, a testament to his success in real estate development. At 32, he'd built an empire from nothing, but tonight felt different. Tonight he was meeting Nova Chen, the woman who had somehow slipped past all his carefully constructed walls. "You're nervous," his assistant remarked, poking her head through the door. "I've never seen you check your watch so many times." Marcus forced a smile. "Just another dinner, Helen." But it wasn't just another dinner. Nova had been painting his portrait for the past 3 months. And somewhere between her gentle corrections of his posture and her infectious laughter when he told terrible business jokes, he'd fallen completely, terrifyingly in love. Across town, Nova stood before her. Easel in the converted warehouse she called home. Paint streaked her hands as she put the finishing touches on Marcus's portrait. She'd captured something in his eyes that he probably didn't even know was there. Vulnerability hidden beneath layers of success and control. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend. "Remember, you're seeing Marcus tonight. Be careful. With your heart." Nova smiled softly. It was too late for warnings. She was already drowning in feelings she'd never expected to have for the enigmatic businessman who'd commissioned her work. When Marcus arrived at the small Italian restaurant they'd chosen, Nova was already waiting. She wore a simple blue dress that made her dark eyes sparkle, and Marcus felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "The portrait is finished," she said after they'd ordered. "Would you like to see it?" Marcus nodded, watching as she carefully unwrapped the canvas on her phone. When the image loaded, he stared in silence. She'd painted him not as the successful businessman the world knew, but as the man he was when he thought no one was looking, hopeful, lonely, searching. "Nova, this is ... he began, but she was looking at something behind him, her face suddenly pale. Marcus turned to see Jennifer, his former business partner and brief romantic interest, approaching their table. She was the last person he wanted to see tonight. "Marcus, darling," Jennifer purred, sliding uninvited into the booth beside Nova. "I didn't expect to find you here." "And who's this lovely creature?" Jennifer. "We're in the middle of dinner," Marcus said tersely. "Don't mind me. I was just telling everyone at the gallery about Nova's colorful past. Such interesting stories about her time in art school. Particularly about her relationship with that professor." "What was his name, Professor?" "Martinez." Nova's face flushed crimson. "Jennifer, you don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Jennifer's smile was razor sharp. "I have photos, dear. Quite intimate ones. Marcus, you should know what kind of woman you're involving yourself with." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard rumors about Nova's professor, but he'd dismissed them. Now seeing her reaction, doubt crept in like poison. "Nova, is this true?" he asked quietly. Nova's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, it's not what you think. Professor Martinez was married, yes, but nothing happened between us. Jennifer's trying to destroy what we have." "Then explain the photos," Jennifer said, sliding a phone across the table. Marcus looked at the images, Nova laughing with an older man, their heads close together, her hand on his arm. In one photo, they appeared to be embracing. "These were taken out of context," Nova whispered. "He was helping me through a difficult time after my father died. He was like a mentor, nothing more." But Marcus was already pulling back, the walls slamming shut around his heart. He'd sworn never to let anyone have the power to hurt him again, and here he was, vulnerable and exposed. "I think we should call it a night," he said, his voice ice cold. "Marcus, please." Nova reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Q. For the portrait, Miss Chen. My assistant will arrange payment." He stood and walked out, leaving Nova sitting there with tears streaming down her face and Jennifer's satisfied smile burning into her memory, outside. Marcus sat in his car for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. He'd been so close to telling her he loved her. So close to taking down every defense he'd built since his mother's death when he was 12. The thought of being betrayed again, of being played for a fool, was more than he could bear. His phone buzzed with text after text from Nova, but he deleted them all without reading them. Whatever they'd had was over before it had truly begun. Asterisk. 3 months later, Nova stood outside the Wellington Group offices, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd tried calling, texting, even showing up at his penthouse, but Marcus had effectively disappeared from her life. Now, with the positive pregnancy test burning a hole in her purse, she had no choice but to confront him. "Miss Chen, Mr. Wellington is in a meeting," Helen said, though her eyes were kind. "He's been in meetings all day." "Then I'll wait," Nova replied, settling into one of the plush leather chairs in the reception area. She waited for hours. Business people came and went. The sun moved across the sky, and still no Marcus. Finally, as Helen was preparing to leave for the day, the elevator opened and Marcus stepped out. He froze when he saw Nova, his expression immediately hardening. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," she said, standing on unsteady legs. "Believe we said everything that needed to be said at dinner?" "Marcus, please. Just 5 minutes." He looked at his watch with theatrical impatience. 5 minutes. My office. In the elevator, the tension was suffocating. Nova watched Marcus's reflection in the polished steel doors, his jaw set, his eyes avoiding hers. This wasn't the man who'd laughed at her terrible coffee-making skills or listened intently as she described her dreams of showing her art in major galleries. His office was exactly as she remembered, imposing, cold, designed to intimidate. Marcus sat behind his massive desk, creating as much distance between them as possible. "What do you want, Nova?" She took a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus's face went completely blank, then slowly twisted with disbelief and something that looked like disgust. "Congratulations," he said finally. "I assume you know who the father is." Nova felt the blood drain from her face. "Marcus, you're the father. You're the only man I've been with in over 2 years. "That's convenient." He leaned back in his chair, studying her as if she were a particularly disappointing business proposal. "Tell me, was this the plan all along? Seduce the wealthy businessman? Get pregnant? Secure your future? How can you say that to me?" Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "You know me better than that. Do I? I thought I knew you 3 months ago, too. Apparently I was wrong about a lot of things." Nova placed her hands on her still flat stomach. "This baby is yours, Marcus. I can prove it once it's born. If you choose to carry it to term," he said coldly, "that's your decision. But don't expect anything from me. I won't be manipulated by someone who was sleeping with her professor while pretending to care about me. I was never sleeping with Professor Martinez." Nova's voice cracked with desperation. "Jennifer lied to you, and you chose to believe her instead of me." Marcus stood, moving to the window. "My lawyers will be in touch about a non-disclosure agreement. I trust you'll be discreet about this conversation." "Marcus, we're done here, Miss Chen?" Nova stared at his back, at the rigid set of his shoulders, and realized she was looking at a stranger. The man she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd shared stories about his childhood, who'd held her close and whispered promises in the dark. That man was gone. "You're going to regret this," she whispered, not as a threat, but as a broken-hearted prediction. She left his office and his life, carrying his child and the weight of his rejection. The next 9 months were the hardest of Nova's life. She painted when she could, sold pieces to pay for doctor visits, tried to ignore the whispers in the art community about her mysterious pregnancy. When Ruby was born on a snowy January morning, Nova held her daughter and saw Marcus immediately in the baby's emerald eyes and the dimple in her tiny chin. She took a photo and sent it to Marcus with a simple message: "Ruby Wellington Chen, your daughter." The message was never returned, never acknowledged. But somewhere across the city, Marcus stared at the photo for hours before deleting it, trying to convince himself that the resemblance meant nothing, that he'd made the right choice. As the months passed, Nova threw herself into motherhood and art with equal passion. She painted Ruby constantly, capturing every milestone, every smile. And though she tried to move forward, part of her heart remained frozen in that moment when Marcus had looked at her like she was nothing. Marcus, meanwhile, buried himself in work. He expanded his company internationally, made more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and told himself he was better off alone. But late at night, when the city was quiet, he sometimes found himself wondering about the child. In the photo and the woman he'd convinced himself had betrayed him. 5 years had passed since that devastating day in Marcus's office, and Nova had built a life that felt both full and incomplete. Ruby was the center of her world, a precocious 5-year-old. With her father's business mind and her mother's artistic soul, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy live with us?" Ruby asked one morning over breakfast, her question delivered with the casual devastation that only children could manage. Nova paused in spreading peanut butter on toast. They'd had versions of this conversation before, but Ruby was getting older, more persistent in her questions. "Some daddies live in different houses," Nova said carefully. "But that doesn't mean they don't love their little girls. Does my daddy love me?" The question hit Nova like a physical blow. She knelt down to Ruby's level, looking into those emerald eyes that were so heartbreakingly familiar. "Your daddy doesn't know you yet, sweetheart. But if he did, he would love you so much." Ruby nodded solemnly, as if filing this information away for future consideration. At 5, she was already showing signs of the analytical mind she'd inherited from Marcus. Combined with an emotional intelligence that was purely Nova's, their small apartment was filled with Nova's paintings, portraits, landscapes, and dozens of images of Ruby at every stage of development. Nova's career had flourished in unexpected ways. Her painting of Marcus, the one she'd shown him that night at dinner, had been purchased by a collector who displayed it in a prominent Seattle gallery. The piece, titled "The Man Behind the Walls," had launched Nova into the contemporary art spotlight. Ironically, her success was partly built on the story of her lost love, though she never spoke publicly about Marcus. Critics praised the raw emotion in her work. It's the way she captured longing and heartbreak in every BRUSHSTR. Meanwhile, Marcus Wellington had become something of a Seattle legend. His real estate empire now spanned 3 countries, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines. But those closest to him, like Helen, who'd been promoted to executive assistant, noticed changes in him over the years. He worked longer hours, took fewer risks with his heart, and had a reputation for being brilliant but cold. I dated occasionally. Beautiful, accomplished women who never quite seemed to break through his defenses. None of them lasted more than a few months. "You're going to die alone and miserable if you keep this up," his friend David told him one evening over drinks at their exclusive club. "I'm not miserable," Marcus replied, though the words felt hollow even to him. "When's the last time you were truly happy? And don't say when you closed the Denver deal." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The last time he'd been truly happy was 5 years ago, sitting across from Nova in that Italian restaurant, watching her eyes light up when she talked about her art. But that happiness had been built on lies, or so he'd convinced himself. "Happiness is overrated," he said finally. "Its success is tangible." David shook his head. "Sometimes I think you're afraid to be happy, like you don't deserve it or something." The comment hit closer to home than Marcus cared to admit. Since his mother's death when he was 12, he'd learned that loving someone meant giving them the power to destroy you. His father had never recovered from the loss, drinking himself to death within 5 years. Marcus had vowed never to be that vulnerable again. Across town, Nova was tucking Ruby into bed, reading from one of the many art books that had become their bedtime ritual. "Mommy, will you paint Daddy someday?" Ruby asked sleepily. "Already. Did baby a long time ago. Can I see it?" Nova hesitated. The painting was stored in her closet, too painful to display but too important to throw away. "Maybe when you're older, Mommy." Ruby's voice was getting drowsy. "I dreamed about Daddy. Last night. He had green eyes like mine." Nova's breath caught. She'd never told Ruby what Marcus looked like, had no photos of him in their home. "What else do you remember about the dream?" "He was sad," Ruby whispered. "He was looking for something. He lost." After Ruby fell asleep, Nova sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the stack of bills on the table. Despite her growing success as an artist, raising a child alone in Seattle was expensive. She'd been too proud to ask Marcus for help, hurt by his rejection to even try. But lately, She'd been wondering if her pride was hurting Ruby. Her daughter deserved to know her father, and Marcus deserved to know the amazing little girl he'd helped create. The question was whether either of them could overcome 5 years of hurt and stubbornness. That same night, Marcus stood in his penthouse, looking out at the city lights. On his desk was a folder Helen had left information about the upcoming charity art auction his company was sponsoring. He'd barely glanced at it. But now something made him pick it up again. The featured artist was listed as N. Chen. His heart stopped for a moment before logic kicked in. It was probably a coincidence. Chen was a common name. Couldn't be Nova, but as he flipped through the promotional materials, he saw a photo that made his world tilt. It was Nova, older now, her hair longer, laugh lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked beautiful and confident and completely out of his reach. Without thinking, he picked up his phone and started to dial her number. Then, stopped. What would he say? How could he explain 5 years of silence and stubbornness? He set the phone down and closed the folder. Some mistakes were too big to fix, some bridges too burned to cross. But deep in his chest, something that had been frozen for 5 years began to crack. Just a little. The Seattle Children's Foundation charity auction was the social event of the spring. Held at the Grand Fairmont Hotel, it attracted the city's elite, all eager to support a good cause while being seen in the right circles. Nova stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching the glittering crowd examine her paintings with critical eyes and checkbooks at the ready. She'd almost declined the invitation to be the featured artist when she learned that Wellington Group was the primary sponsor, but the money raised would benefit arts programs for underprivileged children. And Nova couldn't let her personal history interfere with such an important cause. Miss Chen, the response to your work has been extraordinary, gushed Patricia Winters, the foundation's director. We've already raised more than our goal for the evening, and the auction hasn't even started. Nova smiled, though her stomach was twisted with anxiety. She'd spotted Marcus across the room when she arrived, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. He hadn't seen her yet, seemed to be avoiding the art display entirely. Ruby was at home with Mrs. Garcia, their neighbor and babysitter, probably dreaming of paintbrushes and princess dresses. Nova had considered bringing her. It was a family-friendly event, but the risk of confronting Marcus with their daughter seemed too volatile for such a public setting. Nova Chen. She turned at the sound of her name, finding herself face to face with Jennifer Hartwell. The woman who destroyed her relationship with Marcus 5 years earlier. Jennifer looked exactly the same, blonde, polished, and sharp as a blade. Jennifer Nova's voice was carefully neutral. What a surprise, isn't it? I heard you were the featured artist tonight. Quite impressive, considering your ... circumstances. Jennifer's eyes swept Nova's figure with obvious calculation. Motherhood suits you, though you look tired. What do you want, Jennifer? Just to congratulate you on your success, and to make sure there are no misunderstandings tonight. Jennifer stepped closer, lowering her voice. Marcus is here, as I'm sure you've noticed. He's doing very well for himself, engaged actually, to a lovely woman from Portland. Caroline Morrison, you might know the family. It's old money, very respectable. Nova felt her heart stutter, though. She kept her expression calm. I'm happy for him. Are you? 'Cause I'd hate for there to be any scenes tonight. This is a charity event, after all. We wouldn't want anything to overshadow the children's cause. Before Nova could respond, Jennifer glided away, leaving Nova standing alone with the devastating news that Marcus was engaged. She excused herself to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect herself. Meanwhile, Marcus was having his own crisis of confidence. He'd been trying to work up the courage to approach Nova all evening, but every time he started in her direction, something stopped him. The weight of 5 years of silence, the memory of her tears in his office, the knowledge that he'd been unforgivably cruel. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, David observed, appearing at Marcus's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Maybe I am, Marcus muttered, accepting the drink. That's Nova Chen, isn't it? Your mystery woman from 5 years ago. Marcus nodded, unable to deny it. She's beautiful, Marcus, and talented. You've seen her paintings? There's one that looks remarkably Like you, Marcus had seen it. The portrait she'd painted all those years ago was hanging in a place of honor, and it had stopped him cold. She'd captured something in his face that he'd forgotten existed. Hope, vulnerability, love. Looking at it was like seeing who he used to be, before fear and pride had turned him into someone he barely recognized. It's too late, David. Too much has happened. It's only too late when one of you is dead, David said bluntly. Stop being a coward and talk to her. The Seattle Children's Foundation charity auction was the social event of the spring. Held at the Grand Fairmont Hotel, it attracted the city's elite. All eager to support a good cause while being seen in the right circles, Nova stood at the edge of the ballroom. Watching the glittering crowd examine her paintings with critical eyes and checkbooks at the ready, she'd almost declined the invitation to be the featured artist. When she learned that Wellington Group was the primary sponsor, but the money raised would benefit arts programs for underprivileged children. And Nova couldn't let her personal history interfere with such an important cause. Miss Chen, the response to your work has been extraordinary, gushed Patricia Winters, the foundation's director. We've already raised more than our goal for the evening, and the auction hasn't even started. Nova smiled, though her stomach was twisted with anxiety. She'd spotted Marcus across the room when she arrived, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. He hadn't seen her yet, seemed to be avoiding the art display entirely. Ruby was at home with Mrs. Garcia, her neighbor and babysitter, probably dreaming of paintbrushes and princess dresses. Nova had considered bringing her. It was a family-friendly event, but the risk of confronting Marcus with their daughter seemed too volatile for such a public setting. Nova-chan. She turned at the sound of her name, finding herself face-to-face with Jennifer Hartwell, the woman who'd destroyed her relationship with Marcus 5 years earlier. Jennifer looked exactly the same, blonde, polished, and sharp as a blade. Jennifer. Nova's voice was carefully neutral. What a surprise, isn't it? I heard you were the featured artist tonight. Quite impressive, considering your ... circumstances. Jennifer's eyes swept Nova's figure with obvious calculation. Motherhood suits you, though. You look tired. What? Do you want Jennifer? Just to congratulate you on your success? And to make sure there are no misunderstandings tonight? Jennifer stepped closer, lowering her voice. Marcus is here, as I'm sure you've noticed. He's doing very well for himself. Engaged, actually, to a lovely woman from Portland. Caroline Morrison. You might know the family. Old money, very respectable. Nova felt her heart stutter, though. She kept her expression calm. I'm happy for him. Are you? Because I'd hate for there to be any scenes tonight. This is a charity event, after all. We wouldn't want anything to overshadow the children's cause. Before Nova could respond, Jennifer glided away, leaving Nova standing alone with the devastating news that Marcus was engaged. She excused herself to the bathroom, needing a moment to collect herself. Meanwhile, Marcus was having his own crisis of confidence. He'd been trying to work up the courage to approach Nova all evening, but every time he started in her direction, something stopped him. The weight of 5 years of silence, the memory of her tears in his office, the knowledge that he'd been unforgivably cruel. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, David observed, peering at Marcus's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Maybe I am, Marcus muttered, accepting the drink. That's Nova Chen, isn't it? Your mystery woman from 5 years ago? Marcus nodded, unable to deny it. She's beautiful, Marcus. And talented. Have you seen her paintings? It's one that looks remarkably like you? Marcus had seen it. The portrait she'd painted all those years ago was hanging in a place of honor, and it had stopped him cold. She'd captured something in his face that he'd forgotten existed. Hope, vulnerability, love. Looking at it was like seeing who he used to be, before fear and pride had turned him into someone he barely recognized. It's too late, David. Too much has happened. It's only too late when one of you is dead, David said bluntly. Stop being a coward and talk to her. Across the room, the auction was beginning. Nova returned from the bathroom just in time to see the first of her paintings go up for bidding. The prices were exceeding all expectations, and she should have been thrilled. Instead, all she could think about was Marcus and his supposed engagement. Evening was nearly over when it happened. Nova was standing near the stage, thanking donors and posing for photos when she heard a commotion behind her. A small voice was calling out, getting closer. "Mommy, Mommy." Nova spun around to see Ruby running through the crowd in her pajamas and sneakers, Mrs. Garcia hurrying behind her with an apologetic expression. "Ruby, what are you doing here?" "Mrs. Garcia fell asleep, and I wanted to see your paintings, Ruby," announced, completely unaware of the stir she was causing. "Are you famous now?" Nova knelt down to her daughter's level, her mind racing. The ballroom was full of people, including Marcus, and Ruby was completely exposed. "Sweetheart, you're supposed to be in bed," Nova said gently, trying to position herself to shield Ruby from view, but Ruby had spotted the paintings and was already tugging toward the display. "Mommy, is that the painting of Daddy?" Nova's blood ran cold. Ruby was pointing directly at the portrait of Marcus, which was prominently displayed and had drawn attention all evening. "Ruby, hush," Nova whispered, but it was too late. Ruby broke away from her mother and ran toward the painting, her small voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "Daddy, Daddy, it's me." She tripped on the trailing edge of the tablecloth, tumbling toward the floor in front of the stage. Nova cried out, but she was too far away to catch her daughter. Marcus, who had been frozen in shock since Ruby's arrival, moved on pure instinct. He lunged forward, catching the little girl just before she hit the ground, sweeping her up safely in his arms. For a moment, time stopped. Ruby looked up at Marcus with those unmistakable emerald eyes, the same eyes that looked back at him from mirrors and family photos. Her face lit up with recognition that should have been impossible. "You have green eyes like me?" she whispered, reaching up to touch his face with one small hand. Marcus stared down at his daughter, because there was no denying it now, no hiding from the truth that was written in every feature of her face. She had his eyes, his chin, even the way she tilted her head when she was curious. But she had Nova's gentle spirit, her artist's soul shining through. The ballroom was completely silent. Hundreds of Seattle's elite watching this moment unfold. Nova stood paralyzed a few feet away, tears streaming down her face, waiting for Marcus to reject Ruby just as he'd rejected her 5 years ago. Instead, Marcus's expression crumbled. 5 years of walls, of pretending he didn't care, of convincing himself he'd made the right choice. It all shattered in an instant as he looked into his daughter's trusting face. "Hi, Daddy," Ruby said simply, as if they'd been apart for days instead of her entire lifetime. Marcus's voice broke when he tried to speak. "Hello, Ruby." The fact that he knew her name sent a shock through the crowd. Nova realized that Marcus had kept track of them somehow, had known about Ruby all along. "I dreamed about you," Ruby continued, settling into his arms as if she belonged there. "You were sad and looking for something. Did you find it?" Marcus looked over Ruby's head at Nova, seeing the woman he'd loved and lost, the mother of his child, the life he'd thrown away out of fear and pride. "Yes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I just did." The weeks following the charity auction passed in a blur of difficult conversations, legal consultations, and tentative first steps towards something that might eventually become a family. Marcus had insisted on taking a paternity test, not because he doubted Ruby was his daughter, but because he wanted everything to be official, legally documented, and above board. The results, of course, confirmed what everyone already knew. Ruby was undeniably his child, and with that confirmation came a flood of emotions Marcus wasn't prepared to handle. "I've missed 5 years of her life," he said to David over lunch at their usual club. 5 years of birthdays, first words, first steps. How do I even begin to make up for that? "You don't make up for it," David replied. "You move forward. You be the father she needs now." Easier said than done. Marcus had thrown himself into learning everything he could about child development, reading parenting books like they were business contracts to be analyzed and understood. But Ruby wasn't a business deal to be negotiated. She was a 5-year-old, with her own personality, preferences, and a lifetime of questions about where her daddy had been. Nova, meanwhile, was struggling with her own complex emotions. Watching Marcus with Ruby was both heartbreaking and healing. He was patient with their daughter, gentle in a way she'd never seen him be with anyone else. But between the two adults, there was a minefield of hurt and mistrust that seemed impossible to navigate. Their first official meeting took place at Nova's apartment on a Saturday afternoon. Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying a gift bag that seemed too small for the magnitude of the moment. "Daddy." Ruby launched herself at him the moment Nova opened the door, and Marcus caught her easily, spinning her around until she giggled. "I brought you something," he said, setting her down and offering the gift bag. Ruby tore into the package with 5-year-old enthusiasm, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with tiny paintbrush and palette charms. "It's beautiful, Mommy. Look." Nova's throat tightened as she helped Ruby put on the bracelet. It was thoughtful, personal, perfect for their artistic little girl. It also probably cost more than Nova made in a month, a reminder of the vast difference in their circumstances. "Thank you," Ruby said solemnly, then surprised both adults by taking Marcus's hand and leading him to her room. "Come see my paintings." Marcus spent an hour in Ruby's small bedroom, examining her artwork with the same serious attention he'd once given to million-dollar deals. Ruby had inherited Nova's talent along with her father's determination, and her paintings were remarkably sophisticated for a 5-year-old. "This one's my favorite," Ruby said, pointing to a painting of a man with green eyes standing on a tall building. "I painted it after I dreamed about you." Marcus studied the painting, seeing himself through his daughter's unconscious mind. "Lonely, isolated, searching. It's beautiful, Ruby. You're very talented. Mommy says I get it from both sides of my family." When Ruby went to wash paint off her hands, Marcus found himself alone with Nova for the first time since the night everything fell apart. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "She's incredible," he said finally. "Yes, she is." Nova's voice was carefully neutral. "Nova," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to apologize for 5 years of being wrong." Nova wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture he remembered from their early days together. "You can start by explaining why you chose to believe Jennifer instead of me. Why you threw us away so icily." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at one of Nova's paintings on the wall, a storm over the ocean, dark and turbulent and beautiful. "My mother died when I was 12, he said finally. "Cancer. My father fell apart afterward, started drinking, lost everything. I watched him destroy himself over losing someone he loved." Nova's expression softened slightly, but she remained silent. "When Jennifer showed me those photos, when I thought you'd been lying to me about the professor, it felt like history repeating itself. I thought if I ended things first, if I cut you out of my life completely, I could avoid the pain. So you chose to cause pain instead." "Yes. And it was the worst mistake of my life." Ruby's voice carried from the bathroom where she was washing up. "Mommy, can Daddy stay for dinner?" Nova and Marcus looked at each other, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the woman who'd once loved him enough to paint his portrait from memory. "Daddy has to go home tonight, sweetheart," Nova called back. "But maybe he can come back another day." The visits became a routine. Twice a week, Marcus would spend a few hours with Ruby, taking her to parks, museums, teaching her to play chess. Listening to her chatter about school and friends and her dreams of becoming a famous artist like Mommy, gradually the conversations between the adults became easier, though the deeper hurt remained unaddressed. They talked about Ruby's needs, her education, her future. Marcus quietly began contributing to Ruby's expenses, setting up college funds, ensuring that money would never be a barrier to his daughter's dreams. One evening, after Ruby had fallen asleep during a movie, Marcus helped Nova carry their daughter to bed. Watching Nova tuck Ruby in, smoothing her hair and whispering goodnight, Marcus felt his chest tighten with longing. "I found Professor Martinez," he said quietly as they returned to the living room. Nova froze. "What?" "After the auction, after I realized how wrong I'd been about everything, I hired an investigator. Professor Martinez was your faculty advisor, nothing more. The photos Jennifer showed me were taken at your father's memorial service. He was comforting you because you were grieving." Nova sank into her chair, the weight of vindication and fury warring on her face. 5 years, Marcus. Still 5 years from all of us because you couldn't trust me enough to listen. I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Regret doesn't give me back the nights I cried myself to sleep, or the times Ruby asked about her daddy, or the moments I struggled alone when I should have had a partner. Marcus knelt beside her chair, his voice breaking. Tell me how to fix this. Tell me what I need to do. Nova looked down at him. This powerful man who'd built an empire but couldn't build a bridge across the hurt he'd created. Can't fix it, Marcus. You can only prove, day by day, that you're not the same man who walked away from us. And that's going to take time. A lot of time. It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. Fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for business deals. He learned Ruby's favorite bedtime stories, memorized her schedule, discovered that she was afraid of thunderstorms but loved spiders. Slowly, very slowly, he began to earn Nova's trust again. Not through grand gestures or expensive gifts, but through consistency, reliability, and genuine change. He proved he wasn't going anywhere this time, no matter how difficult the journey became. 6 months after that night at the charity auction, Ruby celebrated her 6th birthday with both parents present, the first birthday Marcus had ever shared with his daughter. As he watched Nova help Ruby blow out the candles, as he listened to his little girl's wish for her family to be together forever, Marcus realized that some moments really could rewrite the past. The road to redemption was long, and there were setbacks along the way. But for the first time in 5 years, Marcus Wellington felt like he was exactly where he belonged, not in a boardroom or a penthouse, but in a small apartment filled with paintings and laughter, and the 2 people who had always been his home. The walls he'd built around his heart had finally come down, and in their place grew something stronger and more beautiful than he'd ever dared to imagine. Love, forgiveness, and the promise of second chances. Sometimes the most unexpected moment really could change everything.